1973. Let's just think about the context here. So, Johnny Carson had just finished sponsoring or hosting the Emmys, and the big win of the year was Sanford and Son. 3 weeks earlier, Secretariat had won the first race in the Triple Crown, and 3 days earlier on Sunday, May 19th, he had just won the Preakness. We're all waiting to see what would happen on June 9th in Belmont. The day before, the Watergate Committee heard testimony that there might be some tapes that would clear Nixon of any suspicion of involvement in the Watergate break-in. And in fact, on the same day, May 22nd, Nixon had a press conference and said that he would waive executive privilege and promise to get to the bottom of this terrible crime. Meanwhile, for the few people who actually knew anything about computers, I also should mention, May 22nd, not the day, but that week, still sticks vividly in my mind. I was a freshman at Harvard at the time. It was approaching finals, but that wasn't the issue. I don't know if it was on that Tuesday or not, was approached by AT&T security. They discovered that I was a not terribly good blue boxer, and so there was some question about whether I was going to come back my second year at Harvard or not. Luckily, I did. So I always say, but little did I know, in that world, at that time, if you were very, very, very lucky, that's how you accessed computers, was on a silent 700, because otherwise you were stuck in a time-sharing center. And I remember working over the Christmas holiday, just before then at the Science Center at Harvard, they turned off the heat during vacation. I actually had to wear open-fingered gloves to stay warm while working at a time-sharing terminal. So we were very, very lucky to even have these things. But what's absolutely amazing about that moment in time is that the way we talk to computers was with this thing. Exactly the same way we talk to each other. You look at the top, the little section, things went in. And so the question that I think about back then, of course I had no idea what was going on at Park. I didn't even know Park existed and the like. But what were these people thinking? I mean, what were they thinking to design this phenomenally high-speed system, 2.94 megabits per second, when the rest of the world was just grateful to have one of these things plodding along? And of course, that's what today's about. Is what were they thinking? Now, what happened when Bob Metcalfe wrote his famous memo on that day? So today is about, of course, we're looking back at history. But the point of looking back is in order to look ahead. The events that happened 40 years ago are extremely relevant today because this is about innovation. This is about white space. This is about changing the world. And our computers have changed. And, I haven't even seen one of these things connected to a phone for about a decade. But amidst all the changes, the constant is, how do you change the world? How do you change the world for the better? How do you create innovation? So consider this as a day of looking into insights and how innovation happens. And in that regard, I'd just say a word about standards. It's a funny thing that when an engineer or a team is trying to get something adopted, they're single-mindedly focused on saying, please, world, just say that you'll try this. And Bob Metcalfe has famously said he got rich not off of Ethernet, but off of selling Ethernet. And that's a key part of the innovation process. But what innovators often forget is actually the biggest consequences to a standard is after the standard is accepted, because standards have a funny way of staying around for a lot longer than we imagine. So just think about that email you wrote this morning and the standard stack that sits underneath it. It's almost like digging into an archaeological site in the Middle East when you go down through history. That you've got ASCII and you've got HTML and everything. You go all the way down to the alphabet, which is probably the oldest standard in it, which curling his toes in an irrigation dish while pressing images into clay. Ethernet is fascinating in this regard because it's not quite a standard, but in the sense that it has pieces of standards to it, it's the right kind of standard we have. Jared Lanier once said, standards are like karma. Bad karma comes back to haunt you forever, and bad standards haunt you forever, things like VRML. Good standards become a platform for further innovation. They evolve, they change, they expand other opportunities for devices that nobody ever imagined would even exist. And so this is a story about innovation. It's a story about evolving standards. It's about something that happened 40 years ago that sent events running off in absolutely the right direction to create innovations that are still continuing today. That's why we're here.